Even though I've only had this audio system put together for maybe a year or two, I've been in the mood to mess around with some pro audio stuff again, and I don't really want to spend a lot of money putting together another project, so I'm thinking about tearing this down and doing something a little different with most of the existing components. And as much as I love this rack, and it turned out beautiful, it's extremely heavy and I can't exactly take it on the road. Now, I had no plans of ever taking this system on the road, but I'm thinking about splitting this up into several smaller cabinets and possibly changing a few of the components to be able to do a few different things. And of course, I'm going to be keeping this rack in case I ever want to put it all back together like this, but for now, I'm just in the mood to tinker with the parts and see what else I can put together. I also want to see if I can set up a bigger desk to work from. Obviously, this is a very tiny desk. It barely holds that 19-inch monitor and a mouse and keyboard. I want a nice, larger size desk that can hold my mixer in a comfortable position and some other components. So I'm going to dig around my workshop and see what I have laying around that I can have to work with and try to set up something different that will possibly be a little bit more portable and also have some better abilities and maybe a little more convenience. So let's take a look. I've got a few of these 9-space metal racks laying around. They're pretty vintage, probably late 70s or early 80s. And I think if I had 3 of these, I could put together a system that has 2 cabinets for the amplifiers, 1 for each side, and then a 3rd cabinet for the EQ, limiter, computer, stuff like that. So if these end up fitting everything in like I need, they'll be perfect. The only real problem I see is that they're only, I think I measured these and they're about 15 inches from the front to the back mounting rails, and the amplifiers are more like 16 and a half, somewhere around there. So all the plugs are going to be sticking out the back, and that's not going to leave me any room for a rack mount power strip in there or anything. So I'm going to have to do some custom stuff, but I should be able to make these work. Another reason I'm doing this rebuild is to experiment with a different type of crossover setup for the speakers. Up until now, I've been using this DBX Drive Rack PA+, which I bought brand new for around $400 or so. This performs the crossover functions, limiter, equalizer, and some other things. It's very flexible and I do like it a lot. It does a really nice job. But my complaint with this thing is the seemingly very high noise floor. With the horn tweeters that I'm using and with powerful amplifiers, I can really hear the background hiss that this thing creates. Even all the way across the room, it's easily audible. And I was going to see if I could demonstrate that just using my workshop speakers here with a Crown K1 amplifier, which is what I was actually using to run my tweeters in the real system in the other room. In fact, that's the very amplifier. I just pulled it out of the rack. But I'm going to plug this in, and as soon as it's initialized, you'll probably be able to hear the hissing coming from the speakers. So let's try. Let's see if the camera's going to pick it up. I'm not sure if that's going to come through on camera or not, but it's very easy for me to hear in person. And I would say that these speakers are only about half as loud as the horn tweeters in the other room, so it's very noticeable on that system. In fact, I've even reduced the gain down to halfway, and on the other speakers it's still very noticeable. And I'm going to try going back to an older crossover and see how the noise floor compares. Let's compare with this old EAW MX100. This thing's probably over 20 years old. and it was actually designed for the very model subwoofers that I have, which is the EAW SB180. And I have a pair of these, and my plan is to use one in each of the amp cabinets. That way I can run a single XLR cable from the mixer to each amp rack, as opposed to running 3 for each channel if I was to have the DVX drive rack in my main cabinet. But I'm going to turn this on and see if there's any noise coming out of it. Pretty much nothing other than the slight click from the relays engaging. Pretty much dead quiet. And now mind you, once I add an equalizer back into the system and the mixer and all that stuff, it's going to put some hiss back in. But this is just to prove the noise level coming from the speaker processor itself. The drive rack is just too darn noisy for my taste. It's been a while since I had my HP EliteBook set up down here. I'm actually using it because I'm working with a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 audio interface, and for some reason when I have that plugged into a desktop system I get a lot of background noise. You know, a lot of, you can hear the mouse movement and the processor and hard drive activity coming right through the sound card if you have the levels up. And on my laptop it's perfectly quiet. I'm not sure why that is. I think there's just a lot of bus noise on the desktop systems. But the reason I've got this hooked up down here is because I've been running some testing on one of these EAW crossovers or processors, whatever you want to call it, to see what the frequency response is for each of the crossover points. And this program I'm using, which is called Rightmark Audio Analyzer, is actually really cool. And I was able to run tests and get some interesting results. Well, everything was pretty predictable except for the output on the low output on this processor is very odd. And let me zoom this in here so you can see better. Here's a screenshot of the response graphs, and for the high output it's pretty straightforward. It looks like it's a simple high pass filter which comes in around 100 Hertz. It's 3 dB down at 100 Hertz. Other than that, nice and flat all the way across. However, on the low side of things it got a little weird, and I've tried testing this several times using different sound cards, different cables, and it always acts really funny with this program. And for some reason it's showing the level to be peaked at about plus 65 dB. That is 6.5, not 6.5. It is actually plus 65. I have no idea why it shows it being that high. In fact, it was when I ran the frequency response test on the low output, it would start clipping the sound cards. I had to reduce the levels way down, even though when I do the calibration before I do the testing it shows the levels as being okay, probably because it uses a 1 kilohertz test signal. But anyway, the response though makes sense because it's peaked at 30 Hertz, and according to EAW, their recommended settings for the SB180 subwoofers that I have is to use a parametric EQ with a 5 dB boost at 30 Hertz and a Q of 2.0. So it's basically a nice hump at 30 Hertz EQ curve for the subs. Other than that, it's just a low pass. I've been experimenting with this program a bit more to see if maybe it was fooling me on that EAW processor. So I hooked up this graphic equalizer, which has a range of plus or minus 15 dB on each frequency, and I've got the levels all calibrated. Right now I've got the 40 Hertz frequency cut to minus 15 dB. So let's see what the program reports. Let it run its test. And show our graph here. And look at this. I'll make this a little bit bigger. We have a sharp cut, which is about minus 14 dB, 13.5 dB right at 40 Hertz. So this is set to minus 15. this is within about 1.5 dB of what I set it to, which that's pretty accurate. So maybe that EAW processor really is boosted like crazy on the sub output, but I don't know. I can't see that being the case, but maybe the hardware doesn't lie, or software, but whatever. Here's a look at some of the cabling I'm going to be using for the project. And over here you can see the work in progress junction panel for the main cabinet. These two power con outputs will be going to the amp racks, and these are the inputs and outputs for the EQ that I'm going to be using. Right here is the roll of 12 gauge 3 conductor power cable, 50 feet long. I'm going to make a pair of 25-foot cables. Those are going to power the amp cabinets. I have a big pair of 4 conductor 12 gauge speaker cables for the top speakers if I continue to run them in bi-amped operation. I'll be using these. I'm probably going to take these banana plugs off the other end and put NL4 FX connectors on the other end, but I bought them pre-assembled like this. This is a stack of 12 gauge 2 conductor cables that I've been putting together for the subwoofers using NL4 FX connectors. This is Coleman Ceoprene cable, really nice stuff, and I've talked to the manufacturer and they said it's probably perfectly suitable for subwoofers, and it's considered OFC cable. It's got lots of strands in it, but not so many that it's hard to work with. It's flexible but durable at the same time. It's not like the cheap wire I was using before, where the strands were just so small that they were breaking off all over the place, and I didn't have that problem with this cable. So this is a good compromise between flexibility and durability. And right here is a pair of 4-channel XLR cable snakes. I'm only going to use these if I decide to keep the DBX processor, because I didn't want to have to run 6 individual lines from the main cabinet over to the amps. These will be a cleaner job, just having 2 snakes instead of 6 cables. I just won't use the 4th channel on these. And over here is all the mounting hardware for the racks. Because they have square holes in the mounting rails, you just pick whatever type of thread you want for the cage nuts and you install those. Over here is 100 feet of Mogami 2549, I think that's what that is, yeah, 2549 microphone cable. I'm going to make my own custom length XLR cables for a lot of this setup. And for the connectors, I'm probably just going to recycle a lot of these Reen silver connectors that I have on some cheaper cables. Nothing really wrong with these Hosa cables. I've used these quite a bit, but some of them have been a little bit noisy or microphonic, I found out. And for the longer runs that I'm going to be doing, like there's going to be 2 cables going from the main rack, over to each amp, and I didn't want a 25-foot run of cheap cables, so I mainly got this for the longer runs, but I might end up making all new patch cables for everything out of this stuff, depending on how it works out. But what else? I think that was pretty much it for the cabling. I'm going to get started on the racks now and see how far I can get with it today. I'm working on putting the main rack together, and I've got the storage drawer in the bottom for holding microphones and cables and USB backup hard drive, things like that. And next up is the computer. I was going to move to a smaller case, but for now I'm going to hang on to this one. I put a lot of work into making this nice and quiet for use in an audio rig, and I kind of like having the amount of space that this case has to work with on the inside. It's a pretty good compromise. And next up I have the DBX 2231 equalizer and limiter, and I'm hoping to use this in between my mixer output and the speaker crossovers. In case something gets turned up a little too high, it'll hit the limiter on this instead of sending the full signal into the amplifiers. And this is a very basic limiter, and it's not as good as the one in the drive rack PA by any means, but it's better than nothing. And I'm also looking forward to having a traditional analog EQ again, after having to used the on-screen one on the Drive Rack PA Plus. It did a good job, but I mean, honestly, it is a lot more cumbersome than just using sliders like this. The only downside of an analog EQ like this is if you go to multiple venues, you don't really have a way to save your settings other than writing them down. But like I said, this system really isn't meant to go on the road but once in a blue moon, and if I ever need to EQ for the venue, it's not going to be a huge deal. Most of the time I'm just going to set it and leave it, EQ it to my system in my room down here. And up at the very top of this rack is going to be the power strip with the individual switches for controlling everything, and that's about all I can fit in this one. I might have to use a second cabinet because I've still got my DMX controller and maybe some other stuff I want to add later. So I might end up needing 2 of these racks for the main desk. But so far this is working out pretty good. The only annoyance I had was that this case is not drilled in such a way that it works in these particular racks, because they only have the top and bottom screw for each rack space. So I'm going to have to add a couple extra holes in here to mount that properly, but not too big of a deal really. Don't you love all this cheap stuff that lies about the ratings? According to the label on this jacket, this is 14 gauge wire. Gee, that's funny. It looks an awful lot smaller than the 14 gauge wire I took off a different power strip. The conductor is visibly thinner on this one, which goes to this American DJ, what is this thing? PC100A power strip. No wonder it says not to exceed 10 amps per channel or 15 amps total, because it's only got 16 gauge wire going in, and I wonder how small the wires are on the inside. Here's a look inside the power switch box. I mainly bought this for the metal enclosure itself because it's got enough room inside it that I could put a larger cord coming in, or even a second cord if need be, to upgrade a couple of the outputs to handle a lot more current for running the amplifier cabinets. These stock switches are rated at 15 amps, but I think it's the receptacles that are rated at 10 amps. And the wiring is only 18 gauge, these little jumper wires in here. And they did a pretty good job of doing clean wiring and everything. It's all shrink tubed, but these spade terminals, a lot of them are pretty loose, so I got to go through and make sure that everything is good and snug, because I don't want any bad connections, especially when I've got this under a heavy load. Here's the junction panel from the original cabinet. I remember how much time it took me to cut all these wires to length and hook everything up and put all the screws in these, put all the connectors on, and now I'm going to tear it all back down and start all over. But I guess the good thing is I can probably do a better job the next time around, and since I'm going to be reusing all the parts, it's not like anything's going to be going to waste. Here's one of the new junction panels for the amp cabinets. Got the 6 speaker outputs, 4 subs and 2 tops, power input, and a signal input. I've left room to add more inputs because, like I said, I may go back to the drive rack and tri-amp the system again, so there'd be my 3 inputs. Power input's got room on either side because I've got to have a box in here that splits off to several plugs, so I got to have room in there for that, and I don't want it sitting right next to the signal input, even though everything's all shielded. And then next space up there'd be the first amplifier, then the processor, second amplifier, air vent, which is essential for a Crown K series, and then the last amplifier at the very top. So it'll all just barely fit in here. One of the amp cabinets is coming along pretty well. I've got all the speaker cables wired and tied up. Each one of these pieces of wire is actually 14 gauge, and the reason I did that was because, you know, they're doubled up and it goes down to the junction panel, so each amplifier is running 2 speak-on connectors, and That way I can have one subwoofer cabinet per connector, which will put an 8 ohm load on each of these pieces of 14 gauge wire. It's actually a little better that way instead of running a single piece of 12 gauge to run a 4 ohm load. And also gives me the advantage of having two individual wires going right to the speak-on connectors. So if I ever want to split it off and run both amp channels to separate speak-on jacks, I can do that pretty easy. So what I got to do next is start making the custom XLR cables and get the power strip installed in the bottom of the rack. But so far it's been going pretty well. I'm working on building the XLR cables, and I think the hardest part has been dealing with the used connectors that I have, because I have to take them apart and clean all the old solder off and remove the old wires and stuff and just prep those for use. And I've also been constantly forgetting to put the strain relief on the cable before I attach the wires, and I'd say about 30% of the time I've had to unsolder them and do them over again. But this Mogami cable is definitely nice to work with, pretty forgiving, and what I like about it is that the insulation on the inner conductors doesn't shrink when you solder it, so it's pretty easy to work with. I've had a lot of wire where you would get a nice clean solder job, but the insulation would just shrink way back, and this stuff is nice. And if you're wondering what this box is, this is an old Behringer Autocom. I'm just using it to hold the connectors while I assemble them, and only a few more cables left to go and I'll be done with all the XLRs. Then I just got to finish up the AC wiring. I've been working on getting these power strips ready to install in the racks. I've got the spade lugs on the cords here that'll connect to the power con connectors, and this will sit down here in this small space underneath the amplifier and give me enough outlets to run everything in the cabinet. Well, I decided to look inside one of these just out of curiosity, and I'm really glad that I did, because they're a safety hazard. The reason being, not only are they very low quality with very poor crimps, but the screws are also very loose on these ring terminals here, and I can move it all with one finger without even trying, really. They're that loose. And imagine having these under a heavy load. Even if there's a 15 amp breaker built into this switch here, a connection this loose is going to get hot really quick, and that's a bad thing to have, especially in a plastic housing like this. So definitely, if you're going to use a power strip, at least do an inspection on the inside and make sure the darn thing is safe. Well, to make a long story short, I did not like those other power strips that I had before, so I ended up picking up two new ones that were still narrow enough to fit in that space, and they were a lot better quality. And I also left the cords longer this time so that I can put them in the rack like this instead of having, a little tiny cord, because the problem was it would bend the connections as I was moving it around inside the rack and pull the spade lugs off. And speaking of the spade lugs, you'll notice they're not on there anymore, because I was talking to a friend of mine the other night, and he reminded me that I could mount these things on the back sides of these panels, so there's no need to have the wires be removable from that. So I just soldered them right on there and put shrink tubing on them, so they're all insulated, much safer and much stronger. And not to mention, it looks 100 times better with these mounted on the back side. And I wish I had enough screws and stuff to do them all like that, but right now I'm running out of patience, and I think I'll just mount the AC like that for now. I guess it depends if I can find a box of 100 screws cheap enough, because that's about how many I'm going to need to go through and redo all these. It's actually cheaper to buy a box of 100 than it is to go through and buy like 40 individual screws. Well, I'm working on making the mounting boards to hold the wheels for the racks, instead of putting the wheels directly on the racks, because they're not really intended for that. I think it'll be much stronger this way. But don't you just love it when you get some casters like this and you can't fit a nut on the bottom of it? These are Nylox, 1/4 size, and I'm going to use 5/16 bolts to actually hold the casters, so there's no way that one of those is going to fit in there. So I'm going to have to go up to the hardware and buy another big box of bolts and regular 1/4-20 nuts that will hopefully fit in there. But man, what a pain. Well, at first I thought I was out of luck, having already drilled 5/16 diameter mounting holes for those casters, and then finding out the bolts weren't going to fit. But then I remembered I had a whole bunch of 1/4-20 T-nuts that used a 5/16 diameter hole, and I went up to the hardware and got some 1-inch long Phillips head 1/4-20 bolts that have a nice low profile head on them, and that way I can have the caster sitting there, have the T-nut on the back side, and there's plenty of room for the caster to clear, even if I add lock washers on here. So I think it actually worked out better that way, using the T-nuts, because now I don't have to deal with trying to put lock nuts on carriage bolts and then having the heads turn on the back side and not being able to stop that from happening. This way I can just have the T-nuts permanently in place and bolt those casters on with lock washers and have it all fit. So I'm just glad it worked out that way. I've got one of the 2 caster platforms almost done. Everything's all mounted together. I just have to paint the edges of the wood with some Duratex. And you won't see this part here because when the rack is installed onto this plate, it actually extends out so that it's flush with the edge of the wood. But I mounted the rack to the platform with the same 1/4-20 by 3/4 inch screws and T-nuts. It's another reason I had to recess the T-nuts in a little bit, because the caster has to sit flat, and then I don't want the T-nuts sticking up and making the rack not sit totally flush on the wood. So I used my drill press to make some recesses for the T-nuts. I've made quite a mess on the floor in here, so I've got to get the vacuum out when I'm done. But this is looking pretty promising so far. I've just got to get the other one together and do a test fit, and I'll take them off and paint them. I've got the first coat of Duratex on the edges of both of these platforms, and I've got all the casters mounted. Tomorrow night when I get home from work, I'll do the second coat, and at that point I can finish assembling the amplifier racks and get the amps off my workshop floor and move on to the next part of the project. Here's the first of the 2 amplifier cabinets, all assembled and ready to go. Turned out pretty good actually, considering all the parts I had to work with, and had to make do with what I had, but I think it turned out pretty well. On the back side, the connectors do stick out a little bit, but not enough that I'm really worried about it for right now. Eventually I'm going to have a metal box back here, or some lacing bars, or some sort of brackets, because I'm also intending on mounting some cooling fans back here. But for now, I think it'll be fine. Once these are sitting in the other room with the speaker cabinets, they're not really going to be going anywhere for quite a while, if ever. But I'm looking forward to getting the second one all together and starting to assemble the whole system. Since one of the amplifiers in my original setup was only a Crown K1 for the tweeters and the rest were all K2, and the new setup I'm building requires all the amplifiers to be matched, so I've been in my workshop rebuilding another K2 that was laying around, and for the first time ever I ran into a bad filter capacitor. I think I've only seen it one other time, and it was on a K2 that I was fixing at work. And when I opened this amp, there was, let's see, where did it go? This little plastic piece that goes over the top of the capacitor was laying in the bottom of the amp. And, you know, I didn't really think much of it because I've seen the wrappers on these shrink up over time and sometimes they just fall off. But just for the heck of it, I decided to use my capacitance meter and test all of these, and I'm really glad I did, because this one ended up being completely open. It was just measuring 0 microfarads, and you know, now that I got it out of the amplifier, I can see that there was a bit of electrolyte leakage around one of the leads, and it's contained underneath that epoxy coating on the bottom of the cap. You know, these capacitors, last time I checked, are over $100 a piece. So I was really glad to find a main board from a dead Crown CH2 amplifier, and it had two of the exact same caps, and they were in good shape. In fact, this one's noticeably heavier even. This is the other good one from the CH2, and you can see that the leads are much cleaner on the bottom. So I took one of those caps and replaced the open one, so it should be good to go. I'm just really glad that not only did I have one of those on hand, but also found the problem before I put this amp all back together, because I would have tested it and it would have either acted funny or been lacking in output power because of the 25% decrease in the filter capacitor. And actually you could say it'd be a 50% decrease, because you got two for each, two for the negative polarity and two for the positive polarity, and they're shared between the output modules here. So it would have been one polarity of the amp would have had half of its rated capacitance, and it definitely would have caused some problems. So really glad to catch that ahead of time. That Crown CH2 also had a really nice heavy power transformer, and I've been using that as a kind of a third hand to hold the end of this cable while I stretch it along the measuring tape, so I can make these 25-foot cables without having somebody to hold one end of it. Works great. This is the input board to one of my Crown K2 amplifiers, and the reason I've got this out is, while I've got the amplifiers out of the rack, I decided to take them all apart and modify the sleep circuit. Early in production on these K-series amps, they had a sleep timer that only lasted about 6 seconds. As soon as the input signal would go away, you had about 6 seconds before the amplifier would go into low power mode. And when it would detect a signal coming in again, it would take a fraction of a second for it to turn back on and start playing the sound. And for some people that was kind of annoying, because that few milliseconds or whatever it takes to wake up could be noticeable if it was repetitive on, every time you had a quiet spot in a song or something, it would you'd notice a slight delay when the amp would wake back up. And I never cared for the idea of the amp constantly turning on and off every 6 seconds either, if you're playing like quiet acoustic music or something. And later in production, Crown changed it to 56 seconds. And the way they did that is you look on the input board and find R15, which is next to this capacitor here, and the original value was 82K. You want to change that to 820K, and that'll give you about 56 seconds of sleep timer. And if you want to disable that timer altogether, there's a jumper marked Z1 that you can just put a jumper across that, and it will never go into low power mode. The downside of that is that after a while it is going to get pretty hot, even just sitting there, because it's going to be drawing about 100 watts, constantly keeping the oscillators running for the output modules. And it's not really a good thing, especially if you've got poor ventilation or if you've got them sitting idle a long time, because they actually can produce more heat sitting idle with no signal than they can playing music, because of the way that both sides of the output stage are equally energized at all times. But I'm going to be changing these resistors over to 820K. Right now they're not even installed at all. My camera's not really focusing, but I've got them removed because I'm getting ready to put the new resistor in place. But yeah, just a quick little note on anybody that might have one of these K-series amps that wants to modify that sleep circuit. I picked up my new top speakers today. These are EAW DS123Hi. I've got 2 pairs of these, and they need a little bit of work, but overall solid condition. The foam is bad on all the mid-ranges, so I've got to take care of that, but the rest of the drivers are at least usable. I think this one's got a piece of the gasket material missing on the bottom, but that's easy to fix. And if I remember right, these use Audax mid-ranges and tweeters, and it was either a Audax or a RCF woofer. I can't remember what exactly these were. I'll have to pull one of them out. But they're definitely vintage. They've got just a pair of screw terminals on the back, no speak-ons or anything fancy like that, so they're probably late 80s or early 90s. I know they're at least 20 years old. but they are the exact model that was that my crossovers are configured to work with. So I think they're going to sound really nice. Here's a look at the mid and treble drivers out of the EAW DS123. The tweeter is made by RCF. It's just got EAW's part number though, model CD2520. And the mid-range is an LC0652, made in France, which I believe this is the Audax PR170MO or M2. I'm not sure if I'm going to try to find another set of these or go with the new B and C replacement. But I was also a little disappointed to find out as I was taking this apart, I had to take the woofer out, and I discovered that this woofer is bad. It sounds like the coil is separated from the cone or something because it's scratchy and it rattles when I move it around. So I may have to pick up another woofer. That's about 150 bucks right there. Ay, ay, ay. Well, I'm not too discouraged yet. I'm still going to go through with the restoration, but I hate when unexpected things like that come up. Even though I don't really care for the physical shape of these cabinets, they're a little bit awkward to work with, I do like the internal design quite a bit. We've got the woofer compartment, which is ported. It's got the rectangular port here, and they're actually using baffles in here, and part of the port is also the separate enclosure for the mid-range driver. Must be sealed because the dampening material is nice and clean in that compartment compared to the woofer. And for the tweeter, they've made a horn out of the wood itself, mounted the compression driver directly on there, which is a pretty substantial RCF driver, by the way. And to make the horn larger, they've made a wood bezel that mounts in front of that to extend the size of that out further. And you know, from the front they look pretty good actually, and they sound good. It's just the trapezoidal shape of these cabinets is a little bit difficult in some situations because of how you have to stack them, and you know, they just look a little silly when you're trying to use them as conventional speakers. These are meant to be flown or hung, if you want to call it that. But I've got these apart because obviously I've got to replace the mid-ranges, and I'm going to test all the tweeter drivers, and most of all, clean cabinets. I'm going to try to get one pair finished this weekend because I need one more woofer, which is on back order, so I've got enough parts to do the first pair this weekend and give them a listening test. So I'm going to start working on that now. Look at the crossovers in these cabinets. They're huge. And I'm glad I decided to look at one because this big heavy inductor down here has come unglued from its mounting board. I'm going to have to fix that before I put the cabinet back together. So when I first moved the stuffing out of the way and saw this, you know, I figured that was it for the crossover and didn't think much of it, but no, these things have massive crossovers. And I thought these cabinets might have been MDF because of how much they weighed, but I can see the ridges in the plywood. I'm pretty sure these are Baltic birch plywood. I could be wrong. Maybe they're so heavy because of these darn crossovers. But yeah, they definitely put some effort into these cabinets. After looking at these a little more closely, I realized that the front baffle is made out of plywood, but the rest is MDF. And the coils, I've looked inside all these cabinets now, and the problem with the inductors being broken off the mounting boards has happened in all the cabinets. In fact, this one's got all but one of them broken off, and I've got to run up to the hardware store and get some more epoxy before they close and get all these glued together so that they can be ready to assemble tomorrow. Since I didn't really feel like trying to refoam the original mid-ranges, I ordered in 4 brand new replacements. And these are the current model driver that EAW uses for these cabinets, and it's from what I understand, a custom manufactured driver by B&C Speakers that's made just to replace that original Audax mid-range in these EAW cabinets. It's got a different type of part number than BNC normally uses on their other drivers. And they've made a couple minor changes to it. Supposedly it's got a little bit better performance than the original, but who knows. I've been testing all the compression drivers using the Dayton audio test system, and I was surprised at how much of a difference there was between the response curves on these 4 drivers. And oddly enough, the 2 matching RCF drivers, the N479s, those 2 tested quite a bit different from each other. And then the 2 EAW drivers, which are basically the same thing, just a different sticker, have also tested different from each other. So if I took one of each of those pairs, they are actually closer to each other than the 2 matching pairs. Not that it's really going to matter. I'm going to be running all of these in the same system at the same time, so I'm sure they're all going to sound close enough to each other when they're in the boxes hooked up to their crossovers, but I just thought this was kind of interesting. Here's a look inside one of the compression drivers. I think this is an RCF M65 diaphragm. They're made out of phenolic, and really surprised how nice these sound. Most of the newer stuff is all titanium, and there is ferrofluid in the magnet gap, and you can see there's also some that got on the surface of the magnet there. So I'm wondering if I should put some fresh fluid in there, because this stuff looks like it's probably contaminated, and maybe that's why the response curves are different on some of these drivers. These diaphragms are probably all a different age. In fact, this one's got looks like a 2004 date code printed on the other side. So they've been changed. As long as they're all the same model, it's not really going to bother me, but I'm just wondering if these are going to need some maintenance before I really put them to use. Boy, it looks kind of weird without my rack sitting right here. And I've been working on getting this room kind of straightened up to rearrange everything. I used to sit right about right here, you know, and then the rack would be right here next to this post, and I'd be sitting here with the camera. But because of the size and shape of this room and how these subwoofers are stacked, the acoustics are really bad, and there's a lot of cancellation in the bass frequencies. You should never stack subwoofers like this. I only did it because I had to. But it gets really bad cancellations between the floor and the ceiling. And ideally you should always have subwoofers on the floor, just, you know, next to each other, lined up. And that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to move everything from this wall over to that wall and vice versa. And all the subwoofers are going to be right side up and lined all the way down this wall here. So hopefully it's going to fix a lot of my cancellation problems. This whole room is an acoustic nightmare though. Another thing is this corner over here. Some of you might remember this whole wall in general has a problem with water seeping in from the outside, and in fact you can see down there's some water damage. That's been treated, but I've still got to cut that nasty wood out of there sometime. I'm using these panels on the floor called dry core. You're supposed to do the whole floor with that stuff, but I'm just making little platforms to hold the speakers and anything else that I got to sit over there, so they're not going to be directly on the concrete. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of work to move all this stuff around. Well, I made pretty good progress today, but I'm getting really tired because it's probably about 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm used to going to bed around 10 o'clock, and I think I'm going to pick up on this tomorrow. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a monster. Still got too much stuff down here that I need to put away and sort through and all that stuff. But yeah, it's almost going to be like that Maxell commercial. I'll be the guy sitting there in that chair, and there'll be a wall of speakers right here, and I'll turn it up and get blown backwards. Yeah, that'll be fun. It's about 1:45 in the morning and I am a total zombie. I haven't stayed up this late in a very long time, but I gotta tell you, I am dying to see if this stuff is all gonna power up and work on the first try. I haven't bothered cleaning up any of the cable mess or anything. I just kind of tossed everything together and hope for the best. But man, am I ever tired. Probably shouldn't be doing this when I'm tired like this, but I just can't resist. Alright, let's see here. I don't know what switches are on what outputs. That was the computer, mixer, EQ, that was the monitor. Okay, that's good. Well, let's hope that the amps are going to work. Ooh, that dimmed the lights. Ooh, that really dimmed the lights. My processor's not turned on here. There we go. Well, everything is juiced up. Dare I try to cue up a song? I think so. Where is mix? Must be right there. Whoops, sorry, I wasn't pointing the camera at the screen. Okay. Apply. Had to set the sound card back up because I was experimenting with that USB sound card. Alright, let's just try something here and hope for the best. That sound. Okay, for some reason the two bottom amps aren't getting a signal. Let's see here. Just gotta switch some wires around here. Let's see if I've got a signal now on that one. Pardon the bad camera work, guys. Oh my god, you guys, this system's gonna be so loud. I have to turn everything down so far because it's already like loud enough that I can kind of feel it, and it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. But this is so touchy that I can barely touch this master fader and it's just blaring. So I have a feeling that this is going to be stupidly loud when I try it tomorrow and turn it up a bit more. You're crazy, man. Oh my god. I found that this system, the way I have it all set up, I have the limiter set to 0 dB, input gain at 0 dB on the limiter, and with the mixer set to 0 and the amps all the way up, I'm right on the threshold of clipping. And right now I've got the amplifiers halfway up and I freaking hit 132 dB, and you know, did that for a couple seconds and decided that was plenty because I don't want to mess up my hearing. I do have hearing protection, and if I have to do any more testing at a level like that, I'm definitely going to use it because that's freaking loud. And I knocked a bunch of stuff down in here, and also found out that the amps are running out of headroom because they're hitting so hard that the lights are dimming in the room every time the bass hits. So I know I'm getting some voltage drop, and you know, I need a little bit stronger incoming circuit, but I didn't trip any breakers, amazingly. But sheesh, I'm really impressed with these EAW processors now that I've got the proper tops and everything is all matched. I mean, I really don't even need to EQ the system at all. It's just, it's right there. And once I've got the other pair of tops hooked up, it's going to be even better. But I think that's plenty of output. Now, I'm still getting some pretty bad cancellation right in the middle where I sit. But if I go over there, it gets so freaking loud. Like, I mean, it's crazy. Oh, and I forgot to mention that 132 dB was measured at about 10 feet away, kind of behind the chair. So you can imagine how loud it was in the chair. Plenty loud. I wanted to take a look at this woofer that was scratchy and find out exactly how it failed. I'm pretty sure it just got overloaded, but I just wanted to check it out of curiosity and see if that was the case, or if maybe it was a adhesive failure or something else. It doesn't seem to scrape really bad, but I can feel friction when I push on it, and it rattles. Almost feels like the voice coil is busted off the back of the cone or something. Can't really tell, but I'm going to try to take the dust cap off and have a look in there, because either way I'm probably going to have to recone this driver. I've already ordered a replacement, but if I can recone this and have it still be worth it, I might do that, if anything, just for the experience. But let's take a look inside. Well, it actually looks to me like the magnet is off center, like this speaker was dropped. There's a larger gap on this side than there is on this side. I don't know if that'll really show up on camera, but if I push on this side, yeah, I guess I'm going to have to take the... See, if I push right here, it doesn't rub. So, well, probably going to have to take this cone out either way, I suppose. Well, at least I was able to salvage all of the gaskets and to replace that missing piece on the other driver. So now I've got to take the rest of the cone out and see if this was a mechanical failure like I suspect, or if the coil itself is warped. Well, like I suspected, the coil looks perfectly healthy. It's just been rubbing and it's created some dust on the side of the coil former, and in fact I can feel there's a dent right here pushing inward on the coil former. So I'm not sure how that happened, but looking at the magnet, it doesn't look like it's really drastically off center or anything. Maybe the coil did get warm and bubbled up right here or something. I can't really get that to show on camera, but yeah, maybe there you can see it. There's a dent. It's too bad. This would have been a good driver. So I may or may not bother reconing this. If this magnetic gap is off center or damaged in any way, I'm not going to waste a recone kit on it. The whole driver is only about $120, I think, and a recone kit's probably close to $100. So probably not really worth it. At least not when you're taking a gamble like that. I don't really see any sign of heat damage. Weird. Well, as luck may have it, RCF appears to have discontinued all the drivers for my EAW cabinets, including the subwoofers. And I know it wasn't very long ago that I had bought 2 brand new pairs of drivers for my sub cabinets. They were still in production at that time. I thought it was only about a year ago, maybe it was 2, but it didn't seem like that long ago. And I really didn't want to spend the money right now, but Parts Express, which is where I normally get most of my speaker components, happened to have 1 pair of these left, so I grabbed them while I still could. And as much as I love having brand new parts like this, sometimes it really hurts having to pay for it, because these are about $300 a piece. But now that I have them, I have all matching drivers for all 6 of my sub cabinets, and I'm going to replace the older ones I have that are recones with these brand new ones. And then I'll take the recones and put them back in these original boxes and save them for spares or future expansion, because I am still planning on finding a 4th pair of these SB180 cabinets sometime down the road. They're getting pretty hard to find though, at least the version that I have. And these, you know, these RCF drivers like this, you can't really replace them with just any old 18-inch driver, because they use a smaller cutout diameter due to the way the frame is constructed. They have kind of a larger outer rim and a more surface area for the mounting bolts than on the traditional size subwoofers that I've seen. These use about a 16.3-inch cutout diameter, where other subs use about a 16.7, 16.8, somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly, but these are a little bit smaller, and I don't want to have to carve out the holes in my cabinets. You know, and that's the other downside of coupling several sub cabinets together. You have to have matching drivers, or things don't work as good as they should. But anyway, enough rambling on that. I'm going to go take one of my cabinets apart and pull out the older driver that's in there, so we can do a side-by-side comparison between that one and this later design version, see what the differences are. Yeah, I can definitely tell I had this playing pretty loud at some point, because some of the bits of fiberglass from inside the box came flying out of the port and was sitting behind the grill. So now I can finally clean this stuff out of here. But let me get this driver out of here and put it up on the workbench. Here's a side-by-side look of every different revision of these sub drivers that I have. When I got my first pair of these subwoofers, they had mismatched drivers in them, and I never knew for sure what this one was because the sticker was gone. This one is an L18-P200K, which I think is one of their earliest models of the subwoofer, and then after this came the P200KN, and then after that the P200N. And going by appearance at the time, from all the pictures I could find online, I was all but certain this was a P200N. And I told the recone shop that, and they checked all the magnet gaps and the frame geometry and everything, and said that they were the same between both of these drivers, and they used the same recone kits. However, I'm pretty sure it was this one. One of these was bottoming out easier than the other when I turned it up pretty loud. Way back when I had that Behringer EPX 3000 amplifier, or whatever that was, I think it was an EPX 3000. Whenever I was pushing that kind of hard, one of these subs would start to bottom out long before the other one. And I'm starting to wonder now if this frame is actually a different RCF driver that has a shallower gap on the magnet or something, because I don't know what the deal was with that. And obviously these new ones, I haven't found the limit of any of these new ones yet, and I don't really care to, because I don't want to dent the back of a voice coil on a brand new driver like this. But yeah, I'm going to do a comparison with my speaker tester and see if any of these actually measure very different from each other. So let me go grab my netbook. Alright, first driver is connected with the Dayton audio test system. So I'm just going to do a measure free air parameters and see what we get on this new driver here. I'm not going to measure the displacement or anything. I just want to compare the impedance curves. So I'm going to save that to memory number 1. Let's see, where did that go? Save to memory 1. Alright, now I'm going to go get one of the older drivers and compare that. Here's the results of the impedance testing on the 3 drivers. The 2 that were reconed are almost identical to each other actually, and then the new one has a higher resonance frequency and less of a peak in the impedance curve. It's probably because this brand new suspension is quite a bit stiffer than those older drivers, and it also has the damping solution on the entire face of the cone, where the recones are mostly bare paper. They only have the damping on the surround itself. Another really handy feature of that Dayton audio test system is the real-time frequency generator and oscilloscope. Like right now I'm playing a 40 Hz tone into this subwoofer cabinet. This is the one that has the shorter ports on it for a higher tuning frequency, and the red line is the signal generator output. The blue line is the impedance response from the driver. So if I touch the cone with my hand, you can see that move a little. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this port tube, it's about a 6-inch length, and I'm going to hold it in front of one of the original ports and watch what happens. You see the frequency, the tuning frequency drop just a little bit. Now I'll take it away. It's not much of a change there. Let me see if I can lower this a little bit, give a better example. Here's 33.64 Hertz, and if I put the port tube in front, again, slight change. Take it away, and you can see the frequency move up just a little bit. It's probably be more ideal if I go up more towards the tuning frequency on this box, which is probably at least 36 Hertz. Yeah, I'm starting to be able to hear it now. It's about 45 Hertz. Add the port length and then take it away, and you can see you can kind of see that change there. It's very touchy. But I'm going to eventually redo the ports on these 2 older cabinets so that the tuning frequency matches the ones with the rectangular ports, because they're tuned quite a bit lower than what these are. But I need to find a good source for the proper size tubes, because these are about a 6-inch inner diameter and 6.5-inch outer diameter if I had to guess, because they're really heavy cardboard tubes, and every port kit that I've found is kind of an odd outer diameter. So probably what I'm going to have to do is just remove these all together and maybe enlarge the hole a little bit and put in a whole new port and flare kit, and that's going to get expensive. And I think I'm going to have to make the ports like 18 inches long or something like that, where these are only about 7.5 inches. These cabinets over here have 12-inch deep ports. Turn the generator off there. But these are tuned the highest, obviously, and in fact when I hook up that sub down there, I can really hear it right around 32 or 33 Hertz, where this cabinet here is all but silent at that frequency. And definitely will get a lot more output coupling these once they're all tuned together. So I'm going to work on that as soon as everything else is done. This will be my next priority, is to tune all these. Well, I finally got the replacement woofer I needed for that DS123. This is the exact replacement EAW LC1242 driver. I got it from a place out in California, and thankfully they did a wonderful job of packaging this. They had the front protected by cardboard, had that wrapped in shrink wrap, and then the whole driver was wrapped in really nice bubble wrap and packed in a properly sized box, so it wasn't going anywhere, and it looks great. I'm looking forward to getting this installed and testing it. This was the last missing piece that I needed for this complete system. Well, since this video is already about an hour long, I've decided I've got to wrap this up. I've got a lot of work to do on this project still, a lot of cleaning up to do with the wiring and I haven't made the desk yet or finished the main cabinet with the AC wiring and some other things. And there's still junk piled everywhere. I have no acoustic treatment in this room, so the acoustics are really bad, but I'm decided I'm going to try to get this video finished, and I'll do the other stuff later on. And instead of doing a very high power test like I would normally do and bounce the camera all over the place with the bass and stuff, I'm going to play something kind of quiet and gentle just to see how articulate this system can be at lower volume. And I know it's very pointless to try to get any sort of quality test like this, because it's got to play through YouTube, through all this stuff, into my camera, and then get edited in my video editor, uploaded back through YouTube, which has another stage of compression before you guys even hear it. And then, of course, all of you are going to hear a very different thing because you're all using different equipment too. But nonetheless, I'm going to try recording something and see how it comes out.
I could be singing this song long after you go.
Playing at such a low level that the other two sub amps are still in standby.
I hope that journey takes you everywhere that you ever want.
Still not registering on the meter. Just barely touched that slider and no sound left. I mean, that's how sensitive this whole thing is, and I am looking forward to doing a much higher power test where everything gets pushed a little bit, but so I've got to use my hearing protection for that and make sure the camera is good and secure, because things are going to get broke otherwise.